The PT-91 Twardy was Poland's shot at building a world-class tank on a Soviet foundation. Just 25 kilometers. That's reportedly how far the PT-91 Twardy got before its first major breakdown during comparative trials. Though the exact details of these tests remain unconfirmed, as the report was classified and no open-source documentation has surfaced to back up the specific figures. 25 kilometers before the thing ground to a halt in the middle of the testing range while mechanics scratched their heads and crawled into the engine compartment. Meanwhile, the German Leopard 2A4 was allegedly cruising along for 174 kilometers without so much as a hiccup. 7 times the distance, 0 faults. Those numbers leaked fast and rattled the brass in Warsaw. But how did a country with serious military ambitions end up with a tank that couldn't hack it on the proving ground? And was the machine really as hopeless as those numbers make it sound? The story of the Twardy didn't begin when the Soviet Union collapsed. It actually goes back further, to the late 1980s, when Poland first started looking at ways to modernize its T-72 fleet. The problem was that Poland's armed forces at the time were your textbook Warsaw Pact army. The tank fleet was almost entirely Soviet-made. Aging T-55s, more modern T-72s in various configurations, and T-72 M1s built under license at a factory in Gliwice. Poland had in fact license-produced over 1,700 T-72 M1 tanks at the Bumar-Łabędy plant. All of that was fine when you were part of the Soviet machine, but it was deadweight for an independent Poland with its sights set on joining NATO. The Polish government was stuck with a brutal choice. Option 1, buy modern Western tanks. But the country was flat broke, and Leopards and Abrams didn't come cheap. Option 2, develop a brand new tank from the ground up. But that would take years and billions of zlotys that just weren't in the budget. That left a third path, and it looked like the smartest play. Take what you've already got and bring it up to modern standards. The choice landed on the T-72 M1. The Poles knew this tank inside and out. They'd been building it themselves at the Bumar-Łabędy factory in Gliwice. All the tooling was in place. The workforce knew what they were doing, and the factory archives had the complete technical documentation. The idea was a no-brainer on paper. Take an existing Soviet platform and kit it out with modern electronics, a new engine, and better armor. The result, a world-class tank at a fraction of the cost. At least, that's how they saw it in Warsaw. The decision to kick off the T-72 M1 modernization actually came in late 1988, and the Gliwice-based Obram Ośrodek Badawczo-Rozwojowy Urządzeń Mechanicznych, the Research and Development Center for Mechanical Appliances, was tapped as the lead design bureau. At first, progress was slow because the Polish General Staff was also weighing the option of buying a newer T-72S, or even the cutting-edge T-80 from the Soviets. After the political upheaval of 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet bloc, those talks fell through and momentum swung behind the domestic upgrade. Starting in July 1991, the T-72 modernization program kicked into high gear at the Bumar-Łabędy factory. Polish engineers threw themselves into the project. They pored over every available piece of documentation on Soviet armored vehicles, broke down the lessons from the Gulf War, and drew up a laundry list of what needed fixing. The core problems with the original machine were staring them in the face. Weak fire control, not enough protection against modern anti-tank weapons, and an engine that was past its prime. All of it had to go. The first prototype of the new tank was ready by the end of 1992. They gave it the designation PT-91. Sources disagree on whether PT officially stands for Polish tank, Polski tank, or is just an internal label. The second name, Twardy, meaning hard or tough, was supposed to drive home the new machine's biggest selling point: beefed-up armor protection. Worth noting, Abram had originally pitched a different design, codenamed Wilk, meaning wolf, but that project got axed and the Twardy concept took priority. The prototype was hauled out to the testing range and trials got underway. In 1993, the Polish Defense Ministry ordered 20 PT-91 tanks for field trials and military evaluation. Polish generals were fired up. Their army was about to get a modern, homegrown tank that could stand up to Western counterparts. They had no clue how many headaches were still waiting for them. The engineers at Bumarwabendi knew full well that tacking on a few cosmetic fixes wasn't going to save the T-72 from its fundamental flaws. This tank had been built for a Soviet doctrine that favored mass over survivability and accepted heavy losses as the cost of doing business. Poland couldn't afford to think that way. Every tank had to survive as long as possible in a real fight. So the designers decided to start where it mattered most, the armor. Soviet reactive armor on the T-72 looked good on paper, but had a glaring weak spot. The explosive containers on the Soviet upgraded T-72 were spaced with gaps as wide as 10 to 15 millimeters between them. Those gaps didn't seem like much, but a shaped-charged warhead from an anti-tank missile could thread right through and slam into the base armor. Polish specialists from the Military Institute of Armament Technology, known as WITU in Zielonka, not to be confused with the design bureau Obrum, came up with their own system called Irawa. The name itself is an acronym that includes the initials of its creator, Adam Wisniewski. The Irawa containers sat nearly flush against one another, all but eliminating the gaps. The new armor wrapped around the tank like scales. Close to 400 explosive containers covering the turret, hull, and side skirts. Unlike the Soviet original, the Poles swapped the rubber side screens for steel ones, giving the flanks extra protection against infantry RPGs. The system came in two flavors. Irawa, one used a single layer of explosive material per container and handled standard-shaped charge rounds. Irawa 2 packed 2 layers and was built to deal with the tandem warhead munitions that Western armies were already fielding. Testing showed that Irawa cut shaped charge penetration by more than half and blunted kinetic penetrators by roughly a third. Polish designers were proud of what they'd pulled off and claimed Irawa outperformed Soviet systems across the board. But armor was only half the equation. Keeping a tank from getting destroyed was one thing. Keeping the enemy from getting a lock on you in the first place was another. That's where the laser warning system came in. Engineers fitted the PT-91 with a setup called SSC-1 Obra, designed and built by the Polish electronics firms Radwar and PCO. 4 optical sensor heads sat around the turret, constantly scanning for laser energy. Modern anti-tank missiles use laser designators to guide them to the target, so the tank could pick up an incoming threat seconds before a shot was fired. The Obra system had 2 modes. In automatic mode, it pinpointed the direction of the threat on its own and instantly popped smoke grenades. The tank carried 24 grenade launchers, arranged in banks on either side of the turret, a mix of Teller anti-laser smoke launchers and standard 902 A-Tucha smoke launchers working in tandem. The smoke screen masked the tank from the observer and threw off the missile's guidance. In manual mode, the commander could decide for himself when to deploy smoke if the automatic system went down for whatever reason. For a post-Soviet upgrade, this was a seriously capable feature that gave the PT-91 a real edge against guided missiles. Next on the list was the power plant. The original Soviet Vive 46-6 engine cranked out 780 horsepower, which was perfectly adequate for a stock T-72. But the Polish version had been loaded down with so much extra gear and armor that it now weighed in at roughly 45 to 46 tons. The old engine simply wasn't up to the task, and the tank felt sluggish in the field. The PZL Wola factory in Warsaw got the contract to build a replacement. Engineers took that same Soviet Vive 46-6 as their starting point and did a thorough rework of the fuel and air injection systems. What they ended up with was a 12-cylinder diesel, the S12U, putting out 850 horsepower. That extra 70 horses got the tank up to 60 kilometers per hour on roads, with a range of 650 kilometers on a full tank of fuel. The fire control system, called Drawa, became the one part of the project the designers could actually brag about. It included a PCD daytime sight for the gunner, a TES thermal imager for night operations developed jointly with the Israeli firm El-Op, a laser rangefinder, and a ballistic computer. The computer factored in target speed, weather conditions, ammo temperature and type, then automatically worked out the firing solution. The commander got an electronic diagnostic display, referred to in various sources as USDK1 or SDK1, that showed the status of every tank system on a dedicated screen. The gun stabilization system also needed an upgrade. The Soviet 2-axis 2E28M stabilizer just wasn't precise enough when the tank was bouncing over rough ground. The Poles turned to their Slovak counterparts and picked up a more advanced stabilization package. Now the crew could fire accurately on the move, an absolute must for any modern tank. The first 20 low-rate production PT-91 tanks were handed over to the Polish land forces in 1993 to 1994. By 1995, full-scale serial production was in full swing. Output peaked that year at 58 tanks. The tanks went to brigades of the 11th Armored Cavalry Division, headquartered in the western part of the country, with units based in Żagań, Świętoszów, Węgień, and other garrisons. Generals made speeches about a new chapter in Polish military history. Journalists snapped photos, and tank crews proudly posed in front of the imposing machines. Nobody there had any idea the excitement was about to come crashing down. Production hit full stride. The Bumarłabendy factory was churning out several new tanks every month, shipping them straight to military units. The plan was to build hundreds of vehicles and completely re-equip Poland's armored formations, but it all started falling apart almost immediately. The first crews putting these tanks through their paces in the field started reporting problems nobody had anticipated. The engine, the one that was supposed to fix everything, turned out to be a prima donna. It demanded finicky maintenance, ran hot in warm weather, and sometimes just quit without warning. The cooling system couldn't cope with Polish summers. Transmission failures became a regular occurrence. The gearbox wasn't engineered for the extra power and started giving out at an alarming rate. Spare parts were pricey and hard to come by. The electrical systems were just as bad. All those add-ons and rewiring jobs had created a rat's nest of circuits that mechanics could barely make heads or tails of. On top of everything, the new engine actually made the tank's road endurance worse compared to the original. Around 1996, the military set up a head-to-head trial against the German Leopard 2A4, which Poland was hoping to eventually acquire. The widely repeated story, PT-91 breaking down after 25 kilometers, Leopard sailing through 174, hasn't been independently verified from declassified sources. Whether the exact numbers are spot on or have grown in the retelling, the bigger picture was unmistakable. Reliability was a serious problem, and the gap with Western tanks was real. The crews who lived with these machines every day didn't need a report to tell them what their tanks were worth. Around the barracks, the PT-91 picked up some pretty brutal nicknames, and getting posted to a Twardy unit was nobody's idea of a plum assignment. Bumarłabendy's management tried to push back. Company reps argued that the Leopard 2A4 was built in Germany, a country with some of the highest engineering standards on Earth, and cost several times what the Polish tank did. Stacking them up against each other wasn't a fair comparison, they said, since the PT-91 was always meant to be a budget option for a country with tighter purse strings. The logic checked out on paper, but the military wasn't having it anymore. The fallout played out in stages. In 2002, the 10th Armored Cavalry Brigade took delivery of Leopard 2 A4 tanks donated by Germany. But contrary to some versions of the story, PT-91 production didn't just grind to a halt. Another 78 full production vehicles were delivered between 1995 and 1997, and 135 modernized T-72 M1 tanks were converted to PT-91 standard between 1998 and 2002. All told, around 230. PT-91s made it into service over close to a decade. Some built new. The majority converted from older T-72 hulls. The engineers at Oberum and the associated institutes weren't ready to call it quits. The reliability issues had done real damage to Polish tank manufacturing's reputation. But the engineers were convinced they could turn it around. The biggest pain point was still the S-12U engine, which couldn't handle the extra weight and kept breaking down. The fix seemed straightforward enough. They needed a beefier, more dependable engine. By 2002, a development variant designated PT-91A appeared, packing the new S-1000 engine with a turbocharger that could push out a full 1,000 horsepower. That 150 horsepower jump over the previous version was supposed to make a noticeable difference in the field. A tank with that kind of power could get up to speed faster, take on hills with less strain, and go easier on the transmission. At the same time, engineers went after other trouble spots. The electrical system got a partial overhaul, with unreliable components swapped out for higher quality parts. The driver's old night sight was replaced with a modern passive device called the PNK-72 Radomka, and the Drawa fire control system got a refresh with a lot of the known bugs ironed out. That said, the S-1000 engine and the major upgrades mostly stayed at the demonstrator stage. They were never widely rolled out across the existing fleet. Even so, the upgrades could only do so much. The Polish Army's budget was stretched thin, and Western hardware got first dibs. Leopard 2 A4s and, from 2014 onward, the newer Leopard 2 A5s became the backbone of the tank fleet, pushing the homegrown machines to the back burner. Then, an unexpected shot at redemption came from the export market. Malaysia was in the market for an affordable main battle tank and took an interest in what Poland had on offer. In April 2003, a contract was signed for 48 PT-91M Pendikar tanks along with support vehicles, a heavily upgraded export version featuring a French Sagem Savon 15 fire control system, a 1,000 horsepower engine with a Rank automatic transmission, and upgraded armament. Deliveries took place between 2007 and 2009. The Malaysia deal was a big win for Bumar Wabendi. It proved Polish armor could find buyers on the world stage, even if only in the budget segment. The Malaysian military received vehicles in a special tropical configuration, built to handle the heat and humidity of Southeast Asia. There was talk of selling to other countries as well. A demonstrator was shown off in Peru, for instance. But nothing substantial ever materialized. Back home, things weren't looking any brighter. By the late 2000s, it was clear the baseline PT-91 couldn't keep pace with modern Western machines. The Irawa armor that designers had been so proud of turned out to fall short against Western 120mm APFSDS rounds fired from 2,000 meters. Any Leopard or Abrams could take out a Polish tank long before it got within shooting range. Military leadership made the call to gradually pull the PT-91 off the front line. The tanks were shuffled to other brigades to replace the oldest T-72s and eventually shunted to training units. The elite tank brigades switched over to German Leopards entirely, with plans to pick up even more capable hardware down the road. Some Twardys served in active units, some were mothballed, and a few were so beaten up they were only good for harvesting spare parts. The ambitious project that was supposed to give Poland a modern, homegrown tank had come up short of its original goals. The Polish army put its chips on foreign equipment, first German Leopards, then American Abrams, and more recently South Korean K2s. Domestic tank manufacturing never fully bounced back from the Twardy's shortcomings, but writing the whole thing off as a failure misses the point. The PT-91 served for decades. Its components and subsystems were exported and used to upgrade T-72 fleets in the Czech Republic, Georgia, and India. The tank itself saw real combat. Poland sent at least 30 PT-91s to Ukraine in 2023, where they were fielded as part of the 22nd Mechanized Brigade and reportedly held their own in tough conditions, including the 2024 Kursk offensive. Polish engineers set out to turn the Soviet T-72 into a modern fighting machine on par with world standards. The technology gap with Western designs was massive and the money just wasn't there. But the PT-91 was more than a breakdown statistic. It was a bridge that kept Poland's defense industry from dying during the chaos of the 1990s and gave its engineers real-world lessons they'd carry into future programs. If you enjoyed this one, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss new episodes on military hardware. Drop a comment. What tank or vehicle should we cover next? Your support helps us keep putting out better content.